Hi guys, Nomis here. Welcome back to Northam City for episode number 17. In this video I'll be starting to work on a neighbourhood called Ridgebay, which sits in the northwestern edge of the borough of Astoria. Some history of this neighbourhood will come gradually, but in this and next episode there's a few important projects to get built out before the rest of the neighbourhood. There's going to be 2 railway stations, one for the commuter trains, as well as a 4-track terminal, which serves as an end stop for 3 services on the metro network. First off, I'm making a little shortcut with the commuter train station. What I'm doing is simply copying everything from the station over by downtown Astoria and placing it down here. I figured they would be built out around the same time and it makes sense for them to have a more or less identical design. To clean it up, I'm deleting a lot of the details around the station before I get it placed where it's gonna sit. In order to give it a small bit of variety, I changed the look of the walls into more of a red brick look. And of course also changing the name of the station signs to Ridgebay Station, as well as adjusting the different wayfinding signs. Nearby the station, I'm building out a kind of large surface parking lot. It's kind of unnecessary and bad for land use near a station, but I think it is also somewhat realistic. This will serve as a park and ride for the station, and when I first do something like this, at least it would make sense to create it right next to the highway. Better land uses can be further away from the station, while this plot between the station and highway can be reserved for car-centric land use, which isn't that great. I imagine all of this was probably developed sometime in the 50s, and there was something else here before. The next project is a big one, which I've mentioned briefly in the past, and that is the West Bay Bridge. The West Bay Bridge was opened in 1940, and it's a double set of suspension bridges spanning what is called the West Bay, which sits between West Island and several towns and cities on the western side of Northam State, among them Waterford. It carries road traffic on the lower deck of both bridges, while one bridge has commuter trains going on the upper deck, with the other bridge carrying the 2 train on the metro network. This makes it the only service on the Northam City metro network operating outside city limits. The bridge is supported by pillars for the first stretch on both sides, with 2 suspension spans in the middle, which is where the large cargo ships pass under going to the port of Astoria, which I built in a previous episode. Down the middle of the bridges there's a wooden elevated walkway for both pedestrians and cyclists. With the bridge totaling about 3 kilometers, it's a popular spot for the runners living near either side of the bridge, or very sporty people commuting to work by bike. In order to make this in game, I used the Bay Bridge assets 2 times next to each other. First I planned to use the roads and connect them to the highway, but I realized that the lower deck didn't work for the train, as there wasn't enough clearance for the wires and catenaries. Instead I placed the highways on the lower decks. Then I covered the road of the Bay Bridge with some pavement fillers and IMT, and then I laid the tracks on top of it. I think this led to a really cool result and it worked out really well. Back in Ridgebay, I'm making a bridge abutment using these cool stone retaining walls. I think it adds a really cool old school look to it. I'm also making a gap where I'm planning to run a road between later, and just measuring it up with the road I'm gonna use. I was looking at the elevated walkway, and around the middle it looked to be just floating in thin air. I had to split apart the two bridges where they started the suspension spans, otherwise the towers would crash into each other and block the walkway. But this led to a gap which looked weird for the walkway. To address this, I'm creating a second set of suspension cables which holds up the walkway. I'm using some cable network assets together with some wires that turned into PO and added a metal cable texture which attaches to the cable down to the walkway for extra support.
Always had a way to make it work and find another route. Always had a way to make it work and find another route. Always had a way to make it work and find another route. Always had a way to make it work and find another route.
The bridge is now mostly finished. There are just some details to do on the other side of the bay, but I will leave that for the future when I actually build over there and connect the networks up. Now I'm back in Ridgebay to build the metro terminal I mentioned at the start. For now I'm just setting up the tracks and getting the lines stopping here. Since this is at the edge of the city and many metro lines terminate here, I thought it would be a perfect spot for a large yard. The Ridgebay yard is probably going to be the largest yard and maintenance facility in Northam City for metro trains, and it's one of the yards which does major overhaul. For inspiration, I've looked at several bigger metro yards around New York City. I'm not building the whole yard in this episode. All I'm doing is setting up the loop track, which all the services use to turn around after terminating, and placing in depot buildings. So this yard will have several uses, and it's not uncommon for big yards like this to serve as a place for trains to turn around. This can often make terminals more efficient, as they don't need to reverse and run over track switches. Instead, they can just drop off passengers and continue straight on to the loop track, and then return to the station in the right direction tracks, which means trains behind them won't be slowed down while waiting. For the design of the metro terminal, I wanted a very old school look, something that looks kind of Victorian in style. The main features are big brick walls with arches along the whole station. In the middle there's open brick arches, which is where the old stone stairs to get up to the platform level will sit. I want this to look like it could be straight out of London or Dublin in the late 1800s, and I think this is a very fitting look for the station in what is a primarily Irish-American neighbourhood. A lot of people moved here to work on the railroads in the city, and I took a lot of pride when building the terminal here. The name of the station is Tully Street, Kildare Road, named after the streets crossing the station at both ends. When the whole station is built, you'll see the road beneath is fully enclosed as it passes underneath, which I think is a pretty cool and unique look. platform shelter I'm using the green pillars again, which holds up a pretty generic white platform roof. At each end I'm using PO to place another set of these green pillars to create an edge to the roof. Otherwise I'm adding all the small details like turnstiles, ticket machines, maps, benches, wayfinding signs, and so on. Where tracks split apart at the ends of the station, I'm creating these green trusses, which I've used a few other places in the metro network around the stations. The last detail I'm adding to the station is putting in one elevator for each of the platforms. I'm doing it now because I realized I forgot to do it earlier. But in real life this would have been added later, so it's more realistic to do it like this. It's a bit of a tight fit with the elevator and the platform because of the roof height, so I need to make a lot of adjustments with PO. It creates a lot of glitchy looking visuals for the elevator, but I figured I could encase it in brick walls to hide this, which is also fitting with the look of the station. Anyways, that is it for this episode. I really hope you enjoyed it if you made it here to the end. A like, comment and subscribe would be greatly appreciated and help me in growing the channel. I also do have a Patreon now in case you would wish to support me further. Have a great rest of your day, hope to see you in the next one, and stay tuned for some cinematics.